We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt Podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, control your thinking.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a guest that I am really excited about for this week's episode. Before I get to him, though, I do want to take a minute to talk about our friend, our sponsor, Sam Cohen with Attorneys First Insurance. As most of you longtime listeners know, Sam provides errors and omissions insurance or professional liability insurance to attorneys and title companies all over the country. He is focusing on Texas and Florida specifically, but he can either write or find E&O insurance, malpractice insurance for attorneys and title companies pretty much anywhere in the country. A great way to support me, a great way to support the show, a great way to support our friend and sponsor would be to refer an attorney or title company that you know to Sam. You can reach him at sam@attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com. So I do want to turn my attention to our guest. Like I said, I'm really excited to have him on the show. I first heard our guest. He was on the B&I podcast, episode 681. The title is Mindset is Everything. I've talked to him a few times, gotten to know him through our conversations, great conversations with him. I'm really excited about bringing him on today's show, and he comes to us all the way from Johannesburg, South Africa. My guest is Lee Roebeck. Welcome, Lee.
Sean, thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this concept of mindset and this concept of controlling your thinking, and we'll transition more into how that relates to maybe even your money mindset. But I think to lay the foundation for that, I know you had a pretty intense experience, the one you talked about on the B&I podcast, and so I would appreciate if you could retell that experience for my listeners.
Sure. So on the 13th of January, Sean, 2019, I was carjacked. I was hijacked in Johannesburg, South Africa here. So carjackings are very prevalent in the country. Our crime statistics are pretty high, so it's commonplace. And it was a Sunday afternoon at about 2:15. And it happened at a shopping mall close to where I stay. I pulled into the shopping mall parking, and all the stores were closed because it was a Sunday afternoon. But I was window shopping. I got out of the car and I was looking through the windows, and I was looking at dining tables because we had just recently moved into a new place. And I was looking for a dining table. The next minute, this gray Volkswagen Golf pulls into the parking lot with blue lights on the dashboard. So I obviously thought that it was an unmarked police vehicle, but instantly my intuition, my gut told me that something's not right here. Well, anyway, Sean, these guys pulled into the parking lot and they rolled down the passenger side window, and the driver said out of the window to me, we just got a call that someone's trying to break into one of the stores here. And the next minute, the passenger in front and the passenger behind the driver both jumped out with firearms in their hands. The one coming to me from the left front and the one from the right-hand side. The guy from the left front came up to me and started tapping my pockets. And he said, where's your car keys? And I showed him it's in my right pocket. Well, anyway, these guys then proceeded to bundle me into the trunk of my car. Now, I was driving a little Volkswagen Polo that Sunday afternoon, and I'm 6.5 foot tall, Sean. So to be honest with you, they boxed me into the trunk of that car, and the first 10 minutes just to calm myself or gain control of my thinking was really tough. But luckily, 10 minutes later, they transferred me into the boot of their car, the Golf, and at least there was a bit more legroom space in there. And what started happening was ideas started playing on the screen of my mind that were really, really helpful that I want to share with your listeners. And, as you've already stated, I'm into ideas around mindset. I'm a mindset coach. And obviously, I've got to be a product of the product. If you can't give anything you don't have. So I've been internalizing these ideas for many years. And one of the first things that came up in the trunk of that car was I run a 6-month coaching program called Thinking into Results. And lesson 9 in the program is a lesson on attitude. And I'm lying in the trunk of that car, Sean, and that lesson, an idea from that lesson plays in my mind. Bob Proctor, who's my mentor, in the lesson video of the attitude lesson, he says, Viktor Frankl, talks about Viktor Frankl, who was a Viennese psychiatrist who spent the war years in Auschwitz, in a Nazi concentration camp. And, we all know what happened in those concentration camps. And Viktor Frankl said, in the worst circumstance, we can search for meaning and we can try and find meaning to life. Now, I want you to just think about that for a moment. Think of the intellectual and the physical abuse he was subjected to on a daily basis. Yet that man said that he could still choose to hold a positive picture on the screen of his mind. So that played on the screen of my mind in the boot of that car. And I thought to myself, Lee, this is a tough spot you find yourself in. But relative to what that man went through, this is probably a walk in the park. So that was something really nice in terms of applying the relativity, not necessarily minimizing what I was going through, but just putting it in perspective, right? The second thing that came to mind in that car was there's a speaker from the West Coast of America, from California, a speaker by the name of Michael Bernard Beckwith. And Beckwith has a 3-step approach to anything negative that's happening to you. Now, if you've got a pen and paper handy, I want you to write these 3 steps down, because if you're going through something challenging at the moment, these 3 steps will help you. And I'll show you how it helped me. So Beckwith's 3-step approach to anything negative you're going through is, number 1, it is what it is. Accept it. It's either going to control you or you're going to control it, at least from a mental perspective. Now, to be honest with you, very early on in that incident or that experience, I had given it over to the universe, to the man above. And I'd said, Dad, you running the show here, whether I make it out of this alive or not, I accept the outcome because you're in control. What was I going to do, right, Sean? 4 armed guys. So I accepted it early on. So that's the first step. Step number 2 is harvest the good. Don't you think that's just a wonderful word? Harvest. Harvest the good. There's good in everything. If you're looking for it, you're going to find it. Because I was looking for it, I found it. My 4-year-old son, Zach, was with me that particular weekend, and he could so easily have been with me at 2:15 on that Sunday afternoon. Thank goodness he was at home. He was safe. My sister, who's 24 years old, much younger than me, she was supposed to, attractive young woman, she was supposed to be with me, looking at these dining tables. Thank goodness she was at home and she was safe. The crime in South Africa, rape is also pretty prevalent. So if either of them were with me, I'd have probably fought these guys off. Both of them were safe. That was something immediately I could start celebrating. And then the third step in Beckwith's approach is forgive all the rest. Forgive means to let go of completely. Now, because these 3 steps played in my mind, laying in the trunk of that car, I could start praying for these guys. I prayed for their parents. I prayed for their kids, even though there was a possibility that they were going to take me away from my kid. I prayed for that they'd find a way to make it out of that sort of lifestyle, to make a meaningful difference in the world. Now, I'm not telling you this, Sean, to impress you or to impress your listeners, but rather to impress upon you that regardless of what you're currently going through, or regardless of what somebody's subjecting you to, you can still control your thinking. Well, eventually, they let me go at the back of one of the big hospitals here in Johannesburg, Beckwith. I know that might be a bit of a challenge for Americans to pronounce because it's an African word, Beckwith Hospital. That was about quarter past 5. Now, that Sunday afternoon, it was 29 degrees Celsius here in Johannesburg. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it was like an oven in the boot of that car. But anyway, 3 hours later, they let me go. And I phoned a family member, Keenan, to fetch me. And when he got there, he said, "Gee whiz, I cannot believe how calm you are." Now, there's another thing, Sean, I quickly want to share with you that probably led to me being as calm as I was. I was part of a group of about 25 speakers and coaches from all around the world, and we were meeting on a Zoom meeting every day, rewriting a chapter called Serenity from a book, As a Man Thinketh, by James Allen. It was a 90-day challenge. We started on the 24th of October, or I started with them on the 24th of October, 2018. So by the 13th of January, when this incident had happened, I had been internalizing and impressing this Serenity chapter for 79 days on my subconscious mind. And, you know, if you read that chapter, it's all about equanimity, self-control, calmness, this inner strength. And that was probably the reason I was so calm. Now, these 3 mental tools had me mentally spiraling up in the trunk of that car. Now, imagine if I did not have those tools, Sean. I'd have been mentally spiraling down, and I'd have jumped out at the back of that hospital, an absolute emotional wreck. Does mindset coaching work? There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that, proper elite level mindset coaching definitely does work. It's no rah-rah motivation. We get you up today and you're down tomorrow again. Proper mindset coaching definitely does work. Now, why am I telling you this and why am I sharing this with your listeners? Because I think right now around the world with the pandemic and, what businesses are experiencing, what losing loved ones, and, there's just a whole lot of chaos happening right now all around the world. And just like Viktor Frankl, we can still choose to hold a positive picture on the screen of our minds. Just to bring my story full circle, I had set a goal, a personal goal of speaking on an international stage many years prior to this incident I'm sharing. And this very worst thing that could have happened to me turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me, because it gave me the opportunity to speak at Bob Proctor's Matrix in Toronto on the 26th of March 2019 to 110 business owners from all around the world. So literally the realization of a dream, of a goal that I had in my heart for a while. Now, I just want to explain a law here called the Law of Polarity. Now, the Law of Polarity states that for every negative, you've got to have a positive, right? So you've got to have an outside of your room if there's an inside. If it's 4 meters from the one wall to the other wall, it's 4 meters back. If something's very bad or you're experiencing something very negative, when you work your way to the other side of that problem, the win is just so much bigger.
I was going to say, I think I've heard that referred to a lot as balance. There has to be balance, the positive and the negative to keep you centered. And I really appreciate you telling and sharing the story. And I heard it before on the other podcast, and you and I had talked about it a little bit. And as you're telling the story, I keep thinking to myself how much I appreciate your gift of telling the story, because I can't imagine having to go through something like that, and then to be able to talk about it. And I'm sure this is not the first or second or third time you've talked about it. So I very much appreciate you sharing that experience with us. And like we discussed when we were talking earlier, I want to make sure that I properly honor that experience. And I want to make sure that I don't do anything to take away from or downplay, but to start to transition to some of the listeners of this show and some of my clients. When we talk about they're being sued by a creditor, they're being sued for a debt that they owe, they're being sued maybe for a debt that they don't owe, they're being sued for some bogus reason, or they're facing a bankruptcy, or they're facing the loss of their income, or the loss of their livelihood, or the loss of a job, or the loss of a family member, the loss of a house, a foreclosure, an eviction. Obviously your experience and those experiences are different in what happened, but I think they're similar in terms of if someone can use what you're talking about, if somebody can discipline themselves, if someone can. I read As a Man Thinketh, and I thought it was it's a quick read, but I thought it was very powerful, to read that book and to say, I'm going through this experience, I'm being sued, I'm in foreclosure, I've lost my job, whatever. How do we start to transition to say everything's going to be okay? How do we start to transition to control our thoughts in a situation like that?
So remember, mental toughness or mental control, Sean, is we can apply it to anything, right? So, this was an extreme situation, but what your listeners might be going through, or certain clients, that's extreme. But I would say whatever you focus on grows. So let the lawyer, let the attorney deal with the problem, and you control your thinking. All of the great leaders of the past, they've disagreed on virtually everything. But they've all, and go and study their records, they've all agreed that we become what we think about. So if you continuously focusing on something that's a problem, or something that's challenging, something bad, if you continuously focus, you want to flip the channel and you want to get yourself onto a different frequency. So I think your listeners, if they just note those tools, and I'll share something later on with your listeners. There's something I'd like to give away to help them with that. But those 3 tools can be applied to anything, Sean.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times the way that I'll analyze something with a client. It is what it is. Learn to accept it. It'll control you, or you can control it. And a lot of times what I'll do with the client is say, okay, well, what's the worst case scenario here? And you're facing a bankruptcy, for example, where the worst case scenario is that your credit might take a little bit of a hit. You'll drop in credit score. Some people have this perception of bankruptcy being like the scarlet letter, where it's really not. People don't walk around saying, I filed bankruptcy. Harvesting the good. Well, the good is that once we come to the other side, you're debt free. The debt is eliminated. There's no more debt. Any money that you make is now yours to keep and save and invest and do what you want to do. Forgive the rest. A lot of my clients have this perception, and maybe it's true, but this perception that the bank has done me wrong. This is the bank's fault. This is my boss's fault. This is my ex-spouse's fault. And forgiveness. Even thinking my own experiences, and I don't know that I've talked about this very much on the podcast, but I went through a scenario where I started a law firm and literally lost it to my former law partners. And I've told the story, I think, a handful of times, but forgiveness. I don't have any ill will towards any of the former partners I used to work with. If they succeed, I'm happy for them. If they don't succeed, I'm sad for them. I'm not necessarily rooting for one outcome over the other, but they move on with their lives. I move on with my life. harvesting the good. I started this great, second law firm that's created the podcast that's been able to help a lot of people. And it is what it is. I take the experience and I learn from it and I move on. Pretty powerful stuff. I love, the positive picture on the screen of your mind is such a powerful visual in my mind.
Is there any such thing as failure, Sean? I mean, that experience with your first law firm, right? We cannot fail. We can only learn and grow. So you went through something that wasn't pleasant at the time, but there was so much that I'd imagine, not knowing the entire story, but I'd imagine there was a lot that you were equipped with to deal with where you are now, your new firm.
Yeah, it was, well, and at the time, my oldest son we didn't have our second son yet. My first son was, I think, just one, maybe about to turn one. And so here I am, this father of a family of three, trying to support my family. And now my law firm the rug is pulled out from under me. So I was really scared. And the interesting thing is my wife was advocating that I just go to another law firm and become an associate attorney or whatever at that law firm. But by that point, I had my law firm for 8 years. I had my network for 8 years. And so, interestingly, the positive there is that it was a lot easier to start over the second time. The first time, I literally started, me and a laptop, and that was it. The second time, I had a lot more infrastructure in place, a lot more support in place when I had to start over the second time.
You mentioned something earlier around forgiveness, and I want to go back to that without maybe not going too deep, but why do all the religions, the great religions, talk about forgiveness? Because we know that it doesn't hurt the other person. So if somebody's wronged you in a relationship, or a partner has done you in, or if you're holding something against someone else, it's affecting you physically, literally physically, and we've got to release that. I think there was my mentor, Bob Proctor. He talks about going to some medical conference many years ago, and he said all these experts with regards to cancer were talking about that they've come to the conclusion that cancer is caused by prolonged suppression of negative emotion. So, it's something that we got to release. We got to let it go.
Yeah, well, and I think, like you said, forgiveness is not for the other person. Forgiveness is for yourself, and releasing those. I agree with you. There was a time in my life where I held grudges, and I'm not perfect, so I'm probably still holding a handful now. But
human, right?
I'm human, but it's. Why waste? I've got so many other great things in my life that I want to spend that energy on. I now have 2 kids and my wife and my family and my friends. And, there's so much other positive things in my life that why would I want to have this knot of negativity to take my energy away from focusing on all that other great stuff?
The channel, right? Flip the channel. Exactly what you're doing, Sean. Focus on something positive. Focus on the good in your life. And, that terrible experience, because it was a tough experience. Let's not mince our words. But
right.
The day I sit here, Sean, and I can honestly say that experience was a gift. It was not only in terms of how I've evolved mentally from it, but that story is connected with so many people around the world. I've got clients all around the world. It's been a gift for the work I do.
Well, and I want to thank you, and I appreciate you in terms of like we said. My intent here was really to have an episode about how the listeners of the show, how my clients can all take the stress of money and the negative experience of money, and use your insight to help break out of that, help to flip that script. But as I find typically happens with my own podcast, it's been therapeutic for me on a personal level to have this conversation with you as well. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing the story, and I am thankful for you sharing your experiences with me and with all the listeners.
Thank you for having me on, Sean, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Now, before I let you go, I know you did say that you've got your Thinking into Results course, and I know you said you had a link for the listeners, a gift for the listeners.
Okay, so because that Serenity chapter by James Allen had such a profound impact on me, I actually went into a studio and I had that Serenity chapter professionally recorded. So you could call it a meditation. But if someone out there listening to this, if you anxious, if you angry, if you're going through something really tough where you're in an emotional state contrary to serenity, calmness, equanimity, I'd like to offer you this recording, and there's a link you want to go to. So the link is bit.ly. I'll spell that phonetically. So it's B for Bravo, I for India, T for Tango, L for Lima, Y for Yankee, / Serenity Recording, one word. So I'll give that to you again. It's bit.ly / Serenity Recording. And just pop your details into that form and I will get that recording off to you, also with some suggestions on how to use it to move you to a place of calmness and control.
Well, very good. Thank you. And I will put that link in the notes for anyone who's listening who may have missed it, so that you don't have to rewind and listen again. I'll put that link in the notes. So as we near the end, is there anything else that you wanted to mention? Anything else that I forgot to ask you?
Sean, I think that's it, and I hope it helps your listeners. It's also been it's really been an honor meeting you and getting to know you, and having these couple of conversations with you. So once again, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. I very, very much appreciate it. This I was very excited about recording this episode, and it has not disappointed. So thank you very much. And I think that will wrap up this week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast. So again, I will post that link for the recording. And I want to thank again Lee Roebeck. Thank you again for being a guest on the show. Like I like to say at the end of every episode, I hope that at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. That will do it for this week's episode, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.